Wow, Matthias, that was amazing. I'm going to use that stuff tonight because I have a problem somewhere in a PHP app, which might sound weird because if you've watched yesterday's talk, this is yellow, so I'm going to talk about JavaScript. So here goes. If you take a look at the ECMAScript timeline, it's like the release history of ECMAScript, there's a few interesting things to see. I'm going to tie my shoelace while I say this. There's a few interesting things to see. Now, what stands out here is, well, I added an image in there, is the fact that ES4, it never got released, it got scrapped. But what I find more interesting on this timeline is the thing on the right-hand side. Because ever since 2015, we've been seeing yearly releases, and the numbering also changed. It was not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anymore, it was the number of the year it was released in. How come? Why this change? Well, enter TC39. TC39 is a technical committee within ECMA International, and they maintain and evolve the ECMAScript language. ECMAScript, I say, yes, ECMAScript, that is a language that they define, and then JavaScript is an implementation of that specification. Remember ActionScript from back in the day, Flash? That was also ECMAScript based. They had classes, wow. So yeah, ECMAScript, JavaScript, kind of the same, but not exactly. So TC39, its members, well, they mainly are companies, developers, implementers, academics, and invited experts. Implementers, those being the browsers. So you have Mozilla in there, you have Google in there, but you also have Apple in there, which is, it can seem weird because they are not into everything, like in all committees, but they are in TC39. Also, other companies are in there. Companies that mainly rely on JavaScript, like for example, Facebook, Igalia, Boku, they are also members of TC39. They meet up every 2 months, and then at those meetings, they discuss about the ECMAScript proposals that are on the table right now. And to do that, they use a development process. You've seen that today in the second talk, Matthias talking about processes. Well, they have the same kind of thing. The process is a 5-stage process. No, they are not the 5 stages of grief, anger, denial, bargaining, and so forth. They are these 5 right here. There's 1 straw person stage, and then we have 4 maturity stages. So the idea is that every proposal that makes it onto the ECMAScript table goes through this pipeline until it is finished. Let's take a closer look. First is a straw person stage. This is like a free-form way to submit a proposal. There are no requirements. You can just like write something down on a napkin and send it over. That's fine. They are just intended to spark a discussion. From then on, it advances to stage 1. Stage 1 requires you to actually write down your proposal in prose. So you have to use words. You have to provide examples. You have to lay out the API that you're trying to define or stuff like that. You have to write it. But things can still change because, yeah, we are discussing it. The goal is that our proposal advances. So we are still discussing things. Stage 2, this is a really interesting stage because right here they also require you to write down your proposal in prose, but using official spec lingo. And once it makes it into this stage, it's quite likely to be included into the eventual specification. So if something reaches stage 2, it might as good as well end up at stage 4. Stage 3, they also require an experimental implementation. Implementers from before, those are browsers. So a JavaScript language feature can already be in a browser without it even being official. I think that's cool. Stage 3, that's the candidate stage. Here, your solution is considered complete, and it will be included into the spec unless they find a critical issue somewhere. And how do they test this? Well, they require 2 implementations, those, again, being the browsers, and then they are asking for feedback, also from you guys. They are asking, do websites break? Is everything still working? Remember Smooshgate, if you're familiar with that? They invented like the array.flat method. They put it on in the browsers, and all of a sudden, older websites using Moo tools, they all broke because they changed the prototype of the flat method, and it was not compatible, so they had to change the proposal before it went to stage 4. If everything goes fine, your proposal just goes from stage 3 to stage 4 without any changes, and it is included in the standard. Woohoo! So these are the 5. Do note that proposals can be withdrawn. For example, a better proposal can be made, or some proposals can get merged. And it's only those that make it to stage 4, those will be included into the yearly release. When is it? Well, every time in January, TC39, they meet up. They look at all the proposals and say, oh, which ones are stage 4 now? Let's pick these and include them into the standard. And then by the time all the formalities are done, we are June, and then in June, the official new ECMAScript Language Specification PDF is released into the wild. Awesome. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the proposals, or some of the proposals, that I found really, really, really exciting, and which I would love to use today. Field declarations. On the right-hand side, I've always mentioned the current stage it is in. And then at the bottom, you can see the link to the proposal. Mainly it's on GitHub. Don't worry, all the slides will become available online afterwards. You can just click through and you will see it. So, field declarations. Say you have a class in JavaScript. That's something that's possible since ES2015. And you want to have a click count variable in there, like a click count property. How would we do this? Well, in the constructor, after calling the parent constructor using super, we have to define this.clickCount being equal to 0. With field declarations, we can do this much, much shorter. We can just define it right there. The PHP folks are going like, hey, we've been doing this for ages. Well, it's coming to JavaScript. Now, what about private fields? Because basically this field here is public. How do we make it private? Does anybody have an idea? Sorry? Underscore. Yeah, the underscore. Is that private? I see some nodding. No, it's not private, because using the underscore, that was like a not official agreement between developers. We're like, hey, but if you see an underscore on there prefixed, it's kind of private. Well, if the compiler sees it, the JavaScript compiler sees it, it will still consider it public, because if they would change it to be private, then old code would possibly break. So they had to choose another character, and they came up with this one. This is still public. They came up with this one, the hash. Do note that this here, the click count thing with the hash prefix, it translates to private click count equals 0. It's not hashtag click count. Hashtags are something like for on Facebook and Twitter. This is private field click count. Awesome. Pipeline operator. If you ever started programming, you like had some problems reading this, because we read from left to right, but computers don't read from left to right. No, they first execute the internal function, double say, then they go to capitalize, and then they go to exclaim. Like, you have to know a few things before you can read it. Now, the Linux people, they are like, hey, dude, on the shell, we just like type a command, and then we pipe it to another command, and then we pipe it again to another command, and that's actually from left to right. JavaScript will have this too. You start with the string, you pipe it to double say, you pipe it to capitalize, and then you pipe it to the exclaim function. There's also another proposal that goes along with that. I won't be covering it. It's about partial application. If you have like more than one variable that goes into a function, it's also a great proposal. Optional chaining. Stage 3, it's only recently stage 3. It was a long time in stage 1. It was only, I think, a few months ago that it went to stage 2 and quite immediately to stage 3. You can use it in Babel, you can use it in browsers. It's awesome. This is like, together with the next proposal I will be talking, these are like my 2 favorite proposals. I'm really, really, really excited about them. So we have an object here. It's a message, it has a user, it has some content, and then again the user has some other properties on there. Let's select some stuff. We'll use console.log to output it. So say you want to log out first name. It's a bit of an interactive kind of thing, so go with me. Message.user.firstname. Yes, let's log it out. The result is the string there, Bramus, that's my name. Let's select some inexistent stuff. Like, for example, if you want to log out the last name, what's the result of this? Undefined, yes, because last name is not defined. Now, let's select some inexistent stuff, but with a fallback value. Like, in case it is undefined, let's provide a fallback value. We do that, in JavaScript using short circuit logic. That's difficult to pronounce, by the way. You use the OR pipe, use the double OR thing. So if a thing on the left-hand side equals to something falsy, like this here is the case, message.user.last name is something falsy, undefined is falsy, we fall back to the value on the right being anonymous, so the result here is anonymous. That's right, cool. Now, let's continue and select something inexistent with a fallback value. For example, we want to log out message.meta.publication date. And do note that there is no meta in there in the message. What will be the result of this? Error. Yes, it won't be undefined, it will be error. And then you see it on the DevTools and it goes like, cannot read property publication date of undefined. You're like, what? What did I do wrong? Well, meta there, that's the undefined. And if you want to read a property for something undefined, well, the error says it to you. I cannot read the property of your undefined thing. How do we solve this? So this is the problem, summarize. How do we solve it? Well, there's a few tricks that you can do before I go to like the optional chaining thing. There's a few tricks that I used to do before optional chaining was a thing. Like you can short circuit the whole thing. Like say if meta is truthy, so it exists, and we have message.meta, and we have message.meta.publication date, output it, or fall back to the default value. Now, since message.meta is undefined, the whole expression evaluates the undefined, or the thing on the right is the thing on the right. Cool. Another nasty workaround, but I was really proud of it when I first discovered it, is do this. Can somebody like interpret it? You basically, every property that you try to read, if it doesn't exist, you fall back to a default new object. So you take message or an object, well, message that exists, so you take message. Okay, message.meta, does that exist? No, so it falls back to the object. And then object.publication date, you won't get the error because publication date, you're trying to read it from an empty object. So I'll just say undefined and then fall back to the value on the right. So it's a nasty hack. Don't use this, really, don't use this. Undefined or the thing on the right is the thing on the right, cool. Now the real solution, folks, is the optional chaining operator. If you ever wrote CoffeeScript, this will be so familiar because this is it. You add the question mark there right in between. And the output will actually be the time right now. Well, it should be the time right now. I try to time it. Are we like 8 minutes past 12? Kinda? Ooh, all right. So how does this thing work? Well, this is a definition. If the operand at the left-hand side of the optional chaining operator evaluates the undefined or null, the expression under the whole expression evaluates the undefined. And otherwise, blah, 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 blah. So here we see the optional chaining operator. We say, well, if the operand at the left-hand side, does it evaluate the undefined or null? No, that is not the case. Message actually does exist. So we continue to the next operator. Message.meta, does that exist? Well, again, the same thing. Does it evaluate the null or undefined? Yes, it does. Message.meta is actually undefined, so the whole expression evaluates the undefined. Whole expression being this thing. Undefined or the new string, and then we have the result. If you want to take a photo, this is the photo up. This is like the whole summary of everything for optional chaining. Now, do note the optional chaining operator is it spelled question mark and the period after it. And this gives us some really strange stuff that you see there, like if you want to call a function. Does the function exist or not? You don't just add the question mark there, you have to add the period after it. Null coalescing, the PHP folks know this. There's still a small problem with optional chaining, because like say you want to select some stuff with a default value in a safe way, show splash screen, again a difficult word to pronounce if you're from Belgium. This is the syntax that we just learned, and the expression still evaluates to true even though show splash screen is false. We have a problem right there. Show splash screen is false. So how do we solve it? Well, enter null coalescing. The null coalescing operator is the double question mark thing. This is the syntax, and the result, it will actually yield false. Yes, I like this. How does it work? The null coalescing operator serves as an equality check against nullery values being null or undefined. So we see the operator right there. We have this thing right here in a safe way. We know from the previous proposal that this expression evaluates to false, not undefined. It actually evaluates to false. So we check, is it null or undefined? No, it is not. So we actually return false right there. And this is great. This is like, these two go hand in hand. Optional chaining and the null coalescing operator, they are like best buddies. Yeah. Dynamically importing. It's a weird name. Well, it's not a weird name. It's an awesome name, but you might know this better as lazy loading. Dynamic importing in JavaScript is basically lazy loading for your JavaScript modules. Say you're writing code and you have some Lightbox library. That used to be a big thing. You pipe this through Webpack. It will bundle up everything for you, and you have this one big bundle with your Lightbox code in there, and then the click handler underneath. Well, that's a bit of a shame of bandwidth, right? Because you only need the Lightbox when you are actually clicking on the link. Dynamic import solves this. You have to publish the Lightbox there on top as a module, a .mjs file. Browsers have excellent support for it. And then you can import it at the moment you need it. You can do this using the import statement right here. It's a promise that you get back, so you can actually await it. When you use await, you have to use an async function right there, of course, and you basically tell the JavaScript runtime to say, using the async keyword, like, hey, this function will pause somewhere and wait for input. And that's right there with the await thing. You say, oh, browser, wait. First, import the thing here on the right, the Lightbox MJS. When you have it, store it into the Lightbox constant, and then we will use it. A side note, by the way, lazy loading images, that's in the browser nowadays. It's a native feature in the browser. You add the loading thing, the loading attribute right there, and you give it the value of lazy. If you want to force an image to load, you add the value of eager, and then auto, that's like the default. This is a great new feature, by the way, because it works so well. I urge you to all add these attributes to your images, because if you don't add it, well, browsers that don't know it, they will still just load the image like it was before. The worst thing you could do by adding this one is saving some bandwidth to your users. That's like a great win. It also works on iframes, by the way. You have an iframe, loading equals lazy. And it will only load when you scroll into view. Cool. Decimal. You ever tried doing this in JavaScript? What's the result? It's not 0.3, it's this thing right here, 0.30000. Let me take a sip. 4, yeah. Wow, why is that? Well, there's this great site that explains it all to you. It's actually the result of the addition with .com at the end. Read it up, it's awesome, but basically JavaScript, it only knows positive numbers, and all the rest is faked, and this is the explanation. So how can we solve it? Well, there's a new proposal, the decimal proposal, which is stage 0, so it will definitely change. But you have this M suffix to your doubles or your floats, and then it will actually work. Awesome. Cancellation API, stage 1. Things might still change, but I like it. Say we have an async, let's say we have a function that returns a promise. So it's going to do something async, like, for example, an AJAX request to a resource somewhere, some expensive calculation, I don't know, whatever, on a different thread. But we have a promise right here. If we call this do something async function, it will output promise started, and then 2 seconds later, 1, 2, promise resolved. But like, how do we stop this promise? From the moment that we start calling this, like, can we stop the execution without it outputting promise resolved? Well, the answer is yes, that's possible using a cancellation token. This is the code. I will walk through it, no worries. So you pass a cancellation token into your function, and then you use it in the promise. First of all, you say like, ooh, if we have already gotten a request to cancel, we'll stop right here. We're not going to execute anything of the stuff below. What we then do is we register a callback function for the time the cancellation is actually being called. If we receive a cancel request from somewhere, well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to reject the promise. That's the last line. And then also, of course, right before we resolve it, we have to do some cleanup. We have to actually unregister our callback. That's how it works. So we create a new cancellation token source. We pass it into our function. And what we do here is, well, we set a timeout. Like after 1 second, we're going to call the cancel method. If I now call the function, it will say promise started. 1 second later, this function will be executed, promise canceled. A practical use case for this is like a live search kind of thing. Like if you're building a Giphy search box, you have an input right there, you're typing cookies. You don't want it to search for the C, and then the CO, and then the COO, and then the COOK, CO. That's stupid because you're like wasting bandwidth right there. Well, this is the solution. Whenever the thing changes, you cancel the previous request using the abort controller thing, using the cancellation API, sorry, and then you perform a new search request. This is a real practical use case for that. Stage 1, I hope this lands in the browsers, well, in JavaScript, I should say. I hope this lands in JavaScript really soon. A side note, you might have heard about the abort controller. The abort controller, this is a vendor-specific solution. This is something that you can find in browsers. It is in Chrome right now. I think it's also being worked on for Firefox, but this is not a part of JavaScript itself, of ECMAScript itself. So this means that if you're writing a Node.js app, you can't be using this. So that's why I like the cancellation API, and I'm not that big of a fan of the abort controller. Slice notation, something more simple. If you thought like, whoa, this cancellation API thing, you lost me right there. Slice notation, you will understand this. If you want to take a slice of an array, you use the array.slice method. Well, there's a shorter syntax landing really soon. Well, not that soon. It's still stage 1, so not that soon. You just say, hey, I want it from index 1 to index 3, and it will return you the result. It also works on strings. If you want to take a substring starting from character 3, that will also work. Object from entries, I think this is like the last one or the second to last proposal that I will be talking about today. Let's take a look back at ES2017. So this is already available for 2 years, well, and even before. It's only officially available for 2 years. We have a user object right here. If you want to read out the values, we use object.values and pass in the object right there, and it will yield us all the values. Same thing for the keys, by the way. If you want the keys, object.keys, pass the object in there, and you have all the keys. There's a new thing in ES2017. It's object.entries. It's an interesting one because it will yield you an array. So this is the array, and every item of the array is again an array, with the first part being the key, the second part being the value. Now, this is really great because this allows you to loop. You can map arrays, you can for each array, so you can loop over an object using its keys and its values. How do you do that? Well, in the for each function, which is something from array, you pass in a callback function. So you pass in the entry, which was the array, and then you use, oh, I have an error here. It should be index 0 and index 1, sorry. Why am I mistaken? Well, the next slide. Using the structuring right here, this is like the key part. If you put in the structuring with it, you can destructure immediately in the callback, in the signature of the function, and then use it right there using the names and no longer using the index values. If you understand this, your JavaScript knowledge is excellent. So, object from entries, that was like a long intro, just to say object from entries. Well, if you use object entries, so you get the array with arrays inside of it kind of thing. If you use object from entries, you can do the reverse. So you can like build your own object and then using arrays and then actually build the object. I think that's quite nice. And then pattern matching, this is the last proposal I will be covering today. Say we have a vector. Like a vector, you have 2D vectors. You most likely know that they have an X and a Y axis, but you also have 3D vectors, X, Y, and Z, so 3-dimensional arrows going in some kind of direction. Now to calculate their distance, you have to use several formulas. If they have X, Y, and Z, you have to use one formula. If they have X and Y, you have to use another formula. If they already have a length, well, you just return the length, and otherwise you just throw the error. So how can we shorten this? because it would be awesome if you could like match the shape of the object. Like, hey, if there's an X, Y, and Z in there, use this, because that's basically what we're saying here in a rather instructive way. Enter pattern matching. This is quite nice. So you take, you use the case keyword there. I don't like it. I would love them to change it to shape, because you want to match the shape of the object. It's still possible though. It's stage 1, so it can change. And you say, well, when X, Y, and Z is present in the shape of my object, use this formula. If X and Y are there, use the other. If it's spreadable, like if it's an array kind of thing, return the length, and otherwise throw an error. A practical use case, AJAX request using fetch. You do some request, you await it asynchronously, and then you say, well, if we get back an HTTP 200 status, that's the OK status, with a certain content length as a header, we output the length. If we get back a 404, we say, oh, the page was not found. If there's just a status in there, and the status is bigger than or equal to 400, there was an error somewhere, be it a client error or a server error. And this is just a selection. There are lots and lots and lots of proposals, and the great thing about it is they are all in the open. You can go to GitHub, you can find the proposals right there, the stage 0 ones, the finished ones, the inactive proposals. They are all there. A note, ESNext, so welcome to the world of tomorrow. Well, actually, welcome to the world of today, because dynamic import, it's been in browsers for quite a while right now. And also, you can use Babel, like the null propagation operator. It's a plugin to Babel. You can ship it in there. Something that's really teasing, it's stage 0. It's quite new, but this could be a potential future syntax. Your build tools automatically build the modules. They automatically bundle it. They do transpile it when it's needed or not. And then you can basically ship different versions to the browser. It's just like having the src set thing on the image tag, where you say, well, if the screen is this wide, use a smaller image. If it's very wide, use the big image. Well, you could like feature match the JavaScript runtime right there, but this is still stage 0. My name is Bramus. I blog at bram.us. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Bram.
Freek.
Thank you. That was very, very interesting to see what's coming.
Thanks.
Like Matthias, you also had a background on PHP and you transitioned to JavaScript.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Well, I still write PHP from time to time, so I didn't really transition. Yeah, but I stumbled into the web. Well, I stumbled into IT from the programming side, like I did C# and Java. I always thought I would do a job like that, and then I discovered the web, and I went with the web, PHP, MySQL, CSS, JavaScript, HTML. It's all connected.
You're still doing it all.
Yes, and I like it very much.
Yeah.
Like I really like how the PHP language has evolved now with 7.3, 7.4. Yeah. Awesome features in there.
What if you had to? If you could add a feature to JavaScript yourself, what would it be? Is there anything that you think like this
Can I change the question? If I would want to add something to PHP from JavaScript?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I want to add to PHP, if you have a default function argument, like the default value for the function argument in JavaScript, it's evaluated at runtime. So if you say, like, I want to create a new object, if no object is defined, if no property is defined in there, you can do it in the signature of your method. JavaScript does this.
Yeah.
PHP does not.
Yeah, at our company, we always say, hey, this is nice in JavaScript, you don't have that in PHP, and the other way around, the languages can learn from each other.
But I like it. The languages are evolving really fast, and they are all like looking at each other. Yeah. Like Swift, for example. Swift, they just looked at Java and other languages, and they took the best parts and bundled them. It's awesome.
And yeah, you can do other kinds of scripting in the browser as well with WebAssembly. What are your thoughts on that? Because I believe somebody even made like PHP run in a browser via WebAssembly.
You can write
it's
PHP
crazy.
in the browser. I haven't touched WebAssembly myself, but I think they have some great use cases. Like if you want to port an old Windows 3.11 compatible app, for example, and you still need it for whatever reason, well, you can port it using WebAssembly. I think it will like cross the line between really native apps, desktop apps. Well, if you can just run them in the website, sure, why not?
Yeah. Okay, thank you for this little Q&A. Can I have another round of applause for Bram?